And so as we wrap up, I just want to offer you, ladies, a couple of quick lessons from the book of Esther. And these are huge. Lesson number 1 is this, very simply: women matter to God. They do. Women matter to God. You know, one of the great myths out there is that women in the Bible are somehow presented as second-rate and second-class, or not as smart or as savvy as men. But Esther is anything but second-rate or second-class. There's a king, and a king acts like a drunk college frat boy. Then there's Haman, and he's just evil to the core. It's Esther. It's Esther who saves the day. It's Esther who saves a whole nation of people. She's not second-rate or second-class. And it's not just Esther. It's a woman like Ruth. She loses her husband. She lives with her bitter mother-in-law, and yet she hopes in the Lord. She is a perpetual optimist, even when everything around her is fallen to pieces. It's Rahab, who, when some spies come to Jericho, she secretly houses them so that they can carry out God's mission, even though God's mission means the destruction of her hometown. It's Deborah, a judge in the Old Testament, quite frankly, much better than most of the male judges, most of the male rulers in the Old Testament. It's Anna in the Gospel of Luke. Here is a widow. She has nothing. She has no money. She is desolate, and yet she is faithful. She stays in the temple and prays and worships day and night. And then, of course, who can forget Mary? Mary, a woman who trusts in a message from an angel that she will have a son, even though she is a virgin. She knows it will be the talk of the town. She knows it will be a scandal, but she goes forward. She goes forward even to the cross, kneeling and bowing while her son forgives the sins of the world. Ladies, just in case you've been told differently, the women in the Bible are awesome. They're awesome. And you are too. You matter to God. Just like Esther, just like the countless ladies of old, you matter to God. That's lesson 1. Lesson 2 is this: God works in the lives of His ladies. God works in the lives of His ladies. You know, one of the consistent criticisms of the book of Esther is that God is never mentioned in this book. The word God never appears in the story of Esther. This actually led Martin Luther to question whether or not this book should be included in the Bible. Because after all, it's kind of strange to have a book of a Bible that never mentions God, right? And yet, even though God is never explicitly mentioned in Esther's story, God's fingerprints are all over Esther's life. I mean, seriously, how do you think Esther gets to be the queen in the first place? How do you think the king's disposition gets changed when Esther walks into his inner chamber so that he extends a golden scepter and spares her life? What do you think Mordecai means when he says, "And who knows but that you have come to a royal position for such a time as this"? Who made such a time as this? Who put Esther in place for such a time as this? Who gave Esther the bravery that she needs to walk through such a time as this? Who did all this? God did all this. You know, sometimes God, He seems to be, kind of absent. God seems to be distant. He seems to be strangely mysterious. But if the story of Esther teaches us anything, it teaches us that even when God is not explicitly mentioned, even when God seems to be kind of absent, oh, He's still there. He's working behind the scenes for the good of His people. He's working behind the scenes for me. He's working behind the scenes for you. That really is the story of the gospel. The gospel is about a man who looked like a common carpenter. He looked like a plain peasant. He looked like he had died on a contemptible cross, and yet behind the scenes, God was working through him because God was him. God came to earth, and so few people noticed. But that's the way that God works. Sometimes you don't see Him, you don't recognize Him, and yet there He is. And so, ladies, let me tell you, even if you don't feel it sometimes, even if you don't recognize it sometimes, God is working through you.